at the timesheet module on Onefile. You can arrive at this area by going to your home page and then select on timesheet. Alternatively, you can find it on the navigation bar on Onefile. It's on the left hand side of your screen. By selecting on timesheet, this will bring you into the timesheet module. So what is the timesheet module? Essentially, the timesheet module collates all of the time entries that you have made on Onefile. So typically you wouldn't create an entry in the timesheet directly. You would create a timesheet entry on one of the other modules on Onefile. So for example, if you go to a class and your training provider uses the attendance register function of Onefile, when they tick your attendance, that would add it to the timesheet. When you create a journal entry and you create a duration and you tick the off the job box, that duration would be added to your feed, would be added into your timesheet. When you complete an assessment, you've got the timesheet block at the bottom of the assessment. If you put in the duration that you spent working on that assessment and you tick off the job, once that assessment is approved, that time will be added into your timesheet. So typically, you wouldn't go directly into timesheet and create an entry, although you can do this. It's not best practice for using the system. The way that Onefile is set up is that if you're doing a learning activity, you go into the journal and create a journal entry. If you're doing an assessment, you would go into your assessments and you put in how long you spent in that assessment. That gets added to your Onefile timesheet. And if you go to a class, it's done through the register. If your training provider doesn't use the attendance registers, it is worth saying because quite a lot of training providers don't use this, it's not a particularly common function. They may ask you, instead of logging it through attendance, they may ask you to create a journal entry to reflect and to log the time you spent in that class. And so that's how you capture time you spent on a classroom session or a workshop, how you'd capture those hours for your off the job. Okay. That being said, if you need to, if you've missed something out, you can go into timesheet and create an entry there. It's just not the best way for tracking things. So let's take a look now at this timesheet module. At the top of the page, you can see some key numbers. So it shows you your total contracted hours. So this is for learners who are doing an apprenticeship. If you're doing an apprenticeship, you've got to do your 6 hours of off-the-job training per week. And so with Onefile, this is calculated for you. And the way the calculation works is it looks at your total contracted hours, it then can calculate how long you're in program, and it then calculates how many off-the-job hours you should be doing for your particular qualification and your particular role. And so it says there that the total contracted hours of this learner is 2,925. Target off the job is 20%. So therefore the target off the job hours is 585. So that is the target that learner should have over the entire program. It also shows the actual off the job hours. So that is the number of hours which that learner has actually logged through entering time onto Onefile. And the bit that's missing, what's quite common on Onefile setups, it's just not shown here, is your expected off-the-job hours. You probably see that on your Onefile, your expected off-the-job hours. And that is calculated by looking at your target off-the-job hours, and then you look at how far through the program you are in terms of the time on program. And it works out, it says, by this time, at this point on program, you should have logged this amount of off-the-job hours if you're on track. So you can understand at that point in time how many hours you should log, and you can compare that to how many hours you've actually logged. You can see if you're ahead with your off-the-job or if you're behind with your off-the-job. I would always recommend logging as much off-the-job time as possible. Don't think that it's a bad thing to log too many hours to be too far ahead. The main thing is that you're not falling behind with those off-the-job hours, because if you're doing an apprenticeship, that is a requirement of the apprenticeship that you're doing off-the-job hours. And if your training provider is using Onefile, that is how they are tracking it. So you can log more than your expected hours, but you don't want to be logging less. Okay. If we look further down, we've then got the timesheet block, and in here it shows you a summary of all of the time that you've logged and the category that you've logged it as. So when you go into the journal, you create a journal entry. There's those categories there, and so it sort of categorizes the number of hours for each category there. It's also got things like register sessions, that's for attendance logs, and it also do assessments as well. We'll have that as a category too. And it shows you the total number of hours logged and the total number of off-the-job hours that you've logged, because remember, it's not like everything counts as off-the-job. So you'll find that there'll be one total will be a bigger number, off the job will be a smaller number than your total, but your off the job column here shows that's how many hours can count towards your off the job. And if you scroll further down, you can see each of the entries here as well. And so with this one, you can read through all the entries, and you can see it's feeding from different places. Now, if there is errors, if you've made a typo when you've created an off-the-job entry, you can correct it here. So if you go over to the Edit button on the right-hand side, you can click Edit, and then you can change the duration, the date, start time, or the information that's been provided with this entry. So you can actually edit the entries there. So again, if you make a mistake creating an entry, you can fix it in this area as well. So for the most part though, if you use this module, really you'll just be coming here to find out where you are in terms of your off the job, where you're expected to be, and a sort of breakdown by category of your off the job hours.